And Oklahoma is a unique space in terms of the number of African American towns that were established. Some suggest upwards of 50 African American towns between 1924 and 1928. Reverend S.S. Jones was going around documenting this sort of self-determined, vibrant African American communities. You see the African American educators, doctors, lawyers, landowners, oil barons, and I think that's what's so remarkable about this footage. To think that individuals, how many years out of slavery, are now owning oil wells that are producing 2,000 barrels a day. Is that not the ultimate American dream? Is that not the ultimate American story? And I think that that was one of the things that Oklahoma and what S.S. Jones is really kind of showing is that African American history and culture is not a monolith. And in a way, it became kind of like a marketing tool to encourage individuals to migrate, to move there, that this is a place where you can live, you can thrive, and peacefully reside. There were still palpable racial tensions. There are lynchings, there's Jim Crow, segregation, there's all of these things, and you still have an African American community, or many communities, that really speak to the fortitude and resilience of Black people in this country.
And it was destroyed, all of it. Throughout history, Black communities in the United States have faced numerous instances of violence, displacement, and utter malicious destruction at the hands of white mobs and authorities. These events have had a profound impact on the development of Black communities and continue to shape the racial landscape of the country. It is disheartening, the kind of history we are broaching today. We hope with all sincerity that the whole historic atrocities can be humanely revisited and conscientiously repaid.
My name is Dr. Tiffany Crutcher, and I am the daughter of Reverend Joey and the late Leanna Crutcher. And I am the great-granddaughter of Rebecca Brown Crutcher, a survivor of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. And as I sit here today in front of this body, in the very seat of our democracy, I know in my bones that she is here with me in this fight for justice. Reparations is simply making amends for a wrong, and that is what we are asking for today.
That is Tiffany Crutcher, testifying at a congressional hearing on the Tulsa, Oklahoma, destruction and mass killings. Dr. Crutcher has had her own share of the sad story too, and as a victim, she isn't done talking yet. Let's listen.
The vestiges of the massacre are still found in Tulsa's criminal legal system, which has torn my family apart. In 2016, Tulsa police officer Betty Shelby shot and killed my twin brother. Terrence Crutcher is his name. Terrence Crutcher is his name. Police looking for weapons instead found gospel CDs in his car. My 40-year-old brother didn't get a fair chance to live. His children didn't get a fair chance to see another day with their father. What happened in Tulsa was perpetrated by our city's own government. Tulsa's government failed its people. Tulsa's government failed these survivors. Tulsa's government failed Rebecca Brown Crutcher. And now we are here asking our nation's government to see that justice is done in the form of reparations. Black people aren't looking for a handout. We are looking for good legislation that recognizes our humanity. We are looking for justice because for centuries, injustice has cost our families an unspeakable price. We shouldn't have to live like this, and we shouldn't have to die like this.
Dr. Tiffany T. Crutcher is a native of Tulsa, Oklahoma, who was thrust into the national spotlight following the death of her twin brother, Terrence Crutcher, who was shot by a police officer in Tulsa, Oklahoma, while holding his hands in the air. The murder of her brother compelled Tiffany to speak out against police brutality, particularly the killing of unarmed Black men. Crutcher is the founder of the Terrence Crutcher Foundation and the Demanding a Just Tulsa Coalition. The foundation's primary focus is criminal justice and policing reform, providing scholarships to African American students, community and AMP, youth development, and policy advocacy. Welcome to yet another poignant video segment. Today, we are taking a look at some Black cities, amongst many more others, that was destroyed by whites. Before we continue, we deem it important to notify you amazing viewers that your support counts a great deal. Ensure to press the like button, share with families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and kindly subscribe to keep the channel growing, if you are yet to. Now let's get to it. Black cities that were destroyed by whites. 1. Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. In the memorable month of June, the year 1921, a white mob laid waste to Greenwood, a neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, known as Black Wall Street.
White Tulsans not only invaded Black Tulsa, they not only looted homes and businesses, they burned it to the ground. The entire black community, aside from a few outlying areas, was absolutely put to the torch.
The term race riot does not adequately describe the events of May 31st to June 1st, 1921 in Greenwood, a black neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In fact, the term itself implies that both blacks and whites might be equally to blame for the lawlessness and violence. The historical record documents a sustained and murderous assault on black lives and property. Whites killed more than 300 black people and destroyed more than 100 businesses. While these mobs had descended on this prosperous Greenwood neighborhood, their sole intention was motivated by nothing but envy. The massacre was fueled by white resentment towards the economic success of black Americans in Greenwood.
The Greenwood section of Tulsa, Oklahoma is the center of African American life for the more than 11,000 black residents of the city. Within this community lie 108 black-owned businesses, 2 theaters, 2 black schools, and 15 doctor's offices.
Booker T. Washington, who came through here en route to Muskogee, when he saw the glitter and glamour and the bustling businesses, he declared Greenwood as a Negro Wall Street of America.
We had everything out on Greenwood and in the Negro area that you needed. That were we had drugstores, grocery stores, cleaners, hotels. All of that, of course, was destroyed.
They burned homes, shops, and local institutions ranging from schools to movie theaters. Entire city blocks evaporated, as well as the contemporary equivalent of tens of millions of dollars in black property and wealth. 9,000 out of a total of 11,000 Greenwood residents were left homeless. White deputies and members of the National Guard arrested and detained 6,000 black Tulsans, who were released only upon being vouched for by a white employer or other white citizen. After living in a black community so affluent that it had been dubbed Black Wall Street, thousands spent the following winter living in tents in an internment camp. 2. Philadelphia, 1985. On May 13, 1985, police fired tear gas, water cannons, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition into 6221 Osage Avenue in West Philadelphia. And then, from a helicopter, officers dropped onto a building a satchel bomb, the kind used in World War II and Vietnam. Inside the home were 7 adults and 6 children, members of the eco-minded black liberation group, MOVE. Only 2 people survived. One of the 5 children who burned was a 12-year-old little Phil Africa. 7 years earlier, his 3-week-old brother was killed after being knocked out of his mother's arms and crushed during an altercation with police. After the bombing, a fire broke out that claimed 61 surrounding buildings and left 250 people homeless in the middle-class black neighborhood. The houses built to replace them were tissue paper shoddy, and the contractors tasked with replacing them served jail time for misusing the rebuilding fund. By the mid-2010s, more than half of the rebuilt homes sat boarded up, purchased by the city for $150,000 each. 3. Anniston, Alabama. From the 1920s to the 1970s, chemical companies made polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, in Anniston, Alabama. The compounds were used as lubricants and insulators in electrical machinery. They also cause cancer and damage brain structures in humans, and were banned in the U.S. in 1979. But by then, more than 800 tons of PCBs had been released into a local canal, 32,000 tons more into the city's open landfill. Within the majority black city, black neighborhoods were hardest hit by the pollutants. Today, creeks still run red, and there are dead zones where vegetation cannot grow. Even young people contend with cancer and other illnesses. The brother of one local activist died of lung and brain cancer at just 16. In 2003, residents won a lawsuit against Monsanto worth hundreds of millions, but each of the more than 18,000 complainants only received a few thousand. Adults, saddled with homes they could not sell, were awarded $9,000 each, while children contending with the possibility of a lifetime of intellectual disabilities and health struggles were given just $2,000. Some of the funds created a clinic to treat the still suffering Anniston residents. It ran out of money and folded in 2017. The next on our list is 4. East St. Louis, Illinois, 1917. Drawn by employment opportunities in wartime industries, between 10,000 and 12,000 African American people left the South for East St. Louis, Illinois, in 1916 and 1917 as part of the Great Migration. Many white citizens of East St. Louis, which had previously been largely white, were disturbed by this movement and by the increase in employment of black people in the city's industrial plants. On July 1, 1917, a rumor spread claiming that a white man had been killed by a black man, and tensions boiled over. The next day, the city of East St. Louis exploded in the worst racial rioting the country had ever seen. Most of the violence, drive-by shootings, beatings, and arson, targeted the African American community. The riots raged for nearly a week, leaving 9 whites and hundreds of African Americans dead, and property damage estimated at close to $400,000. More than 6,000 black citizens, fearing for their lives, fled the city. The carnage was all the more shocking because it occurred only shortly after America's entry into World War I. According to historian Winston James, you have black troops going off to fight to make the world safe for democracy in April, and in July, you have black people being murdered in the most wanton and barbaric manner in East St. Louis, children being thrown back into flaming houses, people being boarded up in their houses before they're torched so that they couldn't escape. So even by American standards, East St. Louis was a horror. At the end of a July 8th meeting in Harlem to discuss the violence, Marcus Garvey, recently returned from a year-long speaking tour of the country, asked to say a few words. The crowd stood breathless as Garvey thundered condemnation. "Millions of our people in slavery gave their lives that America might live," he said. "From the labors of these people, the country grew in power, until her wealth today is computed above that of any 2 nations. With all the service that the Negro gave, he is still a despised creature in the eyes of white people. For if he were not to them despised, the whites of this country would never allow such outrages as the East St. Louis massacre. This is a massacre that will go down in history as one of the bloodiest outrages against mankind for which any class of people could be held guilty." After the riot, varying estimates of the death toll circulated. The police chief estimated that 100 African Americans had been killed. The renowned journalist Ida B. Wells reported in the Chicago Defender that 150 African American people were killed during the July bloodshed. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, estimated deaths at 100 to 200. Some 6,000 African Americans were left homeless after their neighborhoods were burned. The ferocious brutality of the attacks and the failure of authorities to protect civilian lives contributed to the radicalization of many blacks in St. Louis and the nation. Now, on to the next. 5. Seneca Village, New York, 1857. Another very promising city that was destroyed, which you probably haven't heard of, is the Seneca Village in New York. Prior to the establishment of Central Park, a small, thriving community of black Americans and Irish immigrants located alongside what is now West 82nd and West 89th Street. Known as Seneca Village, the settlement prospered for 32 years before it was destroyed by the city to create Central Park in 1857. By the year 1855, New York's Seneca Village was a largely flourishing black settlement with growing community members. The Seneca Village community was created in 1825 when Andrew Williams, a 25-year-old black man, used $120 to buy the first 3 lots. Epiphany Davis, a store clerk, bought 12, and the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church bought 6. The remaining lots were sold to other black people and a few Irish immigrants, allowing a total of 10 homes to be built. Seneca Village was a flourishing community that served as an escape from the racist, harsh treatment that black people endured in Manhattan. The community was home to gardens, farm animals, and allowed fishing in the Hudson River. By the 1850s, the community had 50 homes, with about 225 residents, a school for African American youth, churches, and graveyards. The inhabitants of Seneca Village carried a special privilege compared to other black communities in New York. Because half of them owned their homes, they were allowed to vote. Of the 100 black voters eligible to vote in 1845, 10 lived in Seneca Village. However, in an effort to counteract pollution and unhealthy conditions associated with urban living, city officials decided to construct a large municipal park in central Manhattan in the early 1850s. To acquire the land for the park, the city used eminent domain, a legal principle under the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution that states that the government can take private land for public use if given proper compensation to the landowner. As a result, approximately 1,600 people were displaced and made to leave by the end of 1857, including those who lived in Seneca Village. After the displacement, historians believe the Seneca Village inhabitants went to other black communities in the area. While those who owned property were compensated, some historians believe their compensation wasn't equal to the actual property value. When construction of the park began in 1858, the city left no trace of Seneca Village. Homes and buildings were destroyed, and existing graves were dug up and moved to a cemetery in Queens. Until authors Roy Rosenzweig and Elizabeth Blackmar published their book, The Park and the People: A History of Central Park. In 1992, little was known about Seneca Village. The New York Historical Society soon created an exhibition on the village's history. As a result, Seneca Village's history was incorporated into a curriculum that was to be taught in schools around the city. Although the community existed for only 3 decades, Seneca Village was a cradle for the rights and upward social and economic mobility of emancipated black Americans and new immigrants. 6. Rosewood, Florida, 1923. Rosewood was a successful black town in the Florida Pine Woods until it was burned to the ground by a white mob seeking revenge for the supposed assault of a white woman. On January 5, 1923, a mob of over 200 white men attacked the black community in Rosewood, Florida, killing over 30 black women, men, and children, burning the town to the ground, and forcing all survivors to permanently flee Rosewood. Prior to that day, on the 1st of January 1923 in Sumner, Florida, a young married white woman named Fannie Taylor claimed she had been assaulted by Jesse Hunter, a black man who had escaped a prison chain gang. Though there was no evidence against Mr. Hunter, local white men launched a manhunt in Rosewood, a nearby town of about 200 black people. On January 2nd, a mob of white men kidnapped, tortured, and lynched Sam Carter, a black craftsman from Rosewood, on suspicion that he had helped Jesse Hunter escape. White men continued to terrorize Rosewood, searching for Mr. Hunter, and black residents armed themselves in defense. Late on the night of January 4th, a white posse fired into the home of black Rosewood resident Sylvester Carrier, whom they suspected of harboring Mr. Hunter, and killed an elderly woman. A gunfight between Carrier and the mob lasted into the early morning, killing people on both sides. Outraged that black residents had fought back, the posse left the scene to regroup and returned with more men. On January 5th, a mob of between 200 to 300 white men attacked Rosewood, killing an estimated 30 to 40 black men, women, and children on site and burning the town to the ground. Black residents hid in the woods and fled by train to Gainesville, Florida, never to return. It was later discovered that Fannie Taylor had made false accusations against Jesse Hunter to conceal her extramarital affair with a white man. 7. Elaine, Arkansas, 1919. The film, Bound by Blood, exhumes an almost 100-year-old tragedy deep in the Arkansas Delta, in which hundreds of black sharecroppers were killed by white posses and federal troops near the town of Elaine. With reverberations still lingering today in the lives of descendants and locals, the film explores how human consequences of history continue to shape economic opportunities, identity, and meaning for generations. According to the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, the Elaine mass killing was by far the deadliest racial confrontation in Arkansas history, and possibly the bloodiest racial conflict in the history of the United States. While its deepest roots lay in the state's commitment to white supremacy, the events in and around Elaine, Phillips County, stemmed from tense race relations and growing concerns about labor unions. A shooting incident that occurred at a meeting of the Progressive Farmers and Household Union escalated into mob violence on the part of the white people in Elaine and surrounding areas. Although the exact number is unknown, estimates of the number of African Americans killed by whites ranged into the hundreds. The conflict began on the night of September 30th, 1919, when approximately 100 African Americans, mostly sharecroppers, on the plantations of white landowners, attended a meeting of the Progressive Farmers and Household Union of America at a church in Hoop Spur, Phillips County, 3 miles north of Elaine. The purpose of this meeting? Black farmers had begun to organize in 1919 to try to negotiate better conditions, including fair accounting and timely payment of monies due them by white landowners. Robert L. Hill, a black farmer from Winchester, Arkansas, had founded the Progressive Farmers and Household Union of America, PFHUA. He worked with farmers throughout Phillips County. Its purpose was to obtain better payments for their cotton crops from the white plantation owners who dominated the area during the Jim Crow era. Black sharecroppers were often exploited in their efforts to collect payment for their cotton crops. White landowners often underpaid sharecroppers for their crops and paid when they saw fit. Between the prices of goods purchased from the plantation store and the crop underpayments, many were kept in debt to their landlords. At the time of settlement, landowners generally never gave an itemized statement to the black sharecroppers of accounts owed, nor details of the money received for cotton and seed. The farmers were disadvantaged, as many were illiterate. It was an unwritten law of the cotton country that the sharecroppers could not quit and leave a plantation until their debts were paid. Black labor unions, such as the Progressive Farmers, represented a threat not only to the tenet of white supremacy, but also to the basic concepts of American capitalism. Knowing that black union organizing often attracted opposition, the union advocates had brought with them armed guards who protected the meeting. When a group of white people from the Missouri Pacific Railroad attempted to intrude and spy on the meeting, the guards held them back and a shootout erupted. The result was the abrupt death of railroad policeman W.D. Adkins, employed by the Missouri Pacific Railroad, and the other white man wounded. The parish sheriff called for a posse to capture suspects in the killing. The county sheriff organized the posse, and whites gathered to put down what was rumored as a black insurrection. Additional armed white men entered the county from outside to support the hunt, and a mob of 500 to 1,000 armed men formed. They attacked black people on sight across the county. The mobs descended on the nearby black town of Elaine, Arkansas, destroying homes and businesses and attacking any black people in their path over the coming days. Terrified black residents, including women, children, and the elderly, fled their homes and hid for their lives in nearby woods and fields. After the destruction, state officials concocted an elaborate cover-up, claiming that blacks were planning an insurrection. National newspapers repeated the falsehood that blacks in Arkansas were staging an insurrection, and the Arkansas Gazette, the leading newspaper in Arkansas, wrote that Elaine was a zone of Negro insurrection. Subsequent to this reporting, more than 100 African Americans were arrested and charged with inciting violence, with 12 being sentenced to death by electrocution. After a years-long legal battle by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, the 12 men were acquitted. In all of this, no white attackers were prosecuted. 8. Colfax, Louisiana, 1873. The Colfax destruction of 1873 was a politically motivated mass killing of black Republicans in Colfax, Louisiana. White Democrats, angered by the results of the state election, had led to the mass killing that ensued. This was a direct attack on black men getting the right to vote during Reconstruction. After whites contested the result of the 1872 election, black men and a mostly black state militia holed up around the parish courthouse to protect the local government. On Easter Sunday, April 13, 1873, they were surrounded by a white mob that set the courthouse on fire and shot anyone who emerged. It is estimated that 150 African Americans were killed. 9. Detroit, 1943. On June 20th, 1943, fighting broke out between white and black youth on Detroit's Belle Isle, igniting 3 days of violence, looting, and arson. Mayor Edward Jeffries and Governor Harry Kelly requested federal intervention when the police could not quell the spreading riots. By the time President Franklin Roosevelt sent more than 6,000 U.S. Army troops to restore peace, nearly 700 people had been injured and 34 people were killed, amongst which 25 are black and 9 are white, and property damage totaled approximately $2 million. The brutal nature of the injuries and deaths in those 3 days revealed a well of hatred that went much deeper than city officials were prepared to publicly acknowledge. A lack of honest action, combined with questionable investigations that placed blame squarely at the feet of black Detroiters, further incited their growing sense of injustice. 10. Springfield, Illinois, 1908. The Springfield race riot of 1908 consisted of events of mass racial violence committed against African Americans by a mob of about 5,000 white Americans and European immigrants in Springfield, Illinois, between August 14th and 16th, 1908. Springfield residents woke on August 14th, unprepared for what was about to happen and the change that was coming as a nation. On the evening of August 14th, 1908, after being accused of unrelated sexual assault and murder crimes, 2 black men were sitting in jail. Tension was rising as a large mob of about 5,000 white people were gathering outside, trying to take matters into their own hands. They were demanding the release of both George Richardson and Joe James. George, who was accused of raping a white woman, and Joe, who was accused of murdering a white man. As the police were sensing danger, the county sheriff, with help from Harry Loper, a white business owner, secretly removed the 2 prisoners through the back door and put them on a train that transported them to another jail in Bloomington, IL. Once the mob learned of this move, they erupted in mass racial violence. Spreading out, the mob headed towards the black neighborhoods, looting and damaging black-owned business, destroying their homes, and eventually lynching 2 important members of the black community, Scott Burton and William Dunnigan. Springfield endured racial violence for days, until Illinois Governor Charles Deneen called the Illinois National Guard to bring the riots under control. The nation was shocked by the racial violence that occurred, and the irony of it happening in the hometown of Abraham Lincoln. If it could happen in Springfield, it could happen anywhere, activists believed. As a result, many died, including both black and white residents. Dozens of black-owned homes and businesses were burned to the ground, causing property damage of over $150,000, a large cost in 1908. These events caused thousands of the black residents to pack up their families and move out of Springfield, some to never return. Of the 2 accused black men, who were the main focus of the racial violence, Joe James was eventually tried, convicted, and hanged for the murder of clergy Ballard. George Richardson was set free after his accuser, Mabel Hallam, recanted her story. These are anecdotes of literal physical destruction of black communities. But while the carnage can be as unmistakable as bombs falling from the sky, it more often takes the form of slower burning ravages wrought by economic starvation, over-policing, educational deprivation, and mass incarceration. American history is littered with the destruction of black communities. This brings us to the end of this video segment. Did you happen to learn a thing or two from the content? Freely share your thoughts with us in the comments section, and we will be happy to respond. Also, don't forget to support our efforts by hitting the like button, share with families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and kindly subscribe to keep the channel growing if you are yet to. Thank you for watching.